Okay, so we've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today, and I'm excited to get your take on this one.
Yeah, this one's been on my radar for a while. Definitely some unique angles here.
For sure. So we're diving into IOTA today. They're actually calling themselves the first internet-scale programmable blockchain platform, which, that's a pretty bold claim right out of the gate.
Yeah, no kidding. Big shoes to fill.
Right. And to really get a handle on this, we've got a good mix of sources here. We've got some excerpts from their own documentation that explains their tech and all the features, plus some stuff from their website talking about their big goals and how they see it being used in the real world. And then to top it off, we've got this biometric update article from just the other day, actually, March 19th, 2025. It's all about the alpha release of their decentralized identity framework, which is pretty timely, I'd say.
Absolutely. Identity is the hot topic right now. Everyone's trying to crack that nut in the Web3 space.
Totally. And the thing that really jumped out at me when I was prepping for this was, this whole concept of a blockchain platform that's built specifically for the Internet of Things.
Right. Targeting that machine-to-machine economy everyone keeps talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And they're even saying they can pull off feeless transactions, which, if they can actually do it, would be a huge deal. So yeah, today's mission is to break down what makes IoT different, why it might matter to you, the listener. And honestly, I'm curious to see if they can live up to all this hype.
The hype is definitely there. So let's separate fact from fiction, shall we?
Let's do it. So first things first, what is IOTA, like at its core?
Okay, so their documentation describes it as, let me see here, an open source distributed ledger technology, or DLT,
Okay, DLT, got it.
and a cryptocurrency.
Hmm.
Which, I mean, that part's not super surprising these days, right?
Yeah, it seems like almost every blockchain project has a token these days.
Pretty much. Anyway, so this all started back in 2015.
Okay, so they've been around for a while.
Yeah, a bit longer than some of these newer projects that have popped up recently. And they're governed by this nonprofit called the IOTA Foundation, which is registered in Germany.
Interesting, Germany, huh? So not your typical Silicon Valley startup then.
Nope. Different vibe over there. Anyway, their big vision, the thing they're really aiming for, is to basically build this decentralized infrastructure that can secure and power, get this, the entire digital world.
The entire digital world. That's ambitious, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. And don't forget, they're also calling themselves the first internet-scale programmable blockchain platform. So, I mean, they're definitely not lacking in confidence.
All right, so they're aiming high, but what actually makes them different, like, under the hood?
Well, the thing that sets them apart from most blockchains is that they don't actually use a blockchain.
Wait, what? So no blockchain? Then how?
I know, right? It sounds weird, but they use something called the tangle.
The tangle. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What is this tangle thing?
So picture a traditional blockchain. You've got blocks of transactions chained together, added one after the other. Mining, proof of work, all that jazz, right?
Right, yeah.
The tangle is totally different. It's what's called a directed acyclic graph, or DAG.
Yeah.
Basically, instead of miners, every new transaction has to directly validate two previous transactions on the network.
So it's like each transaction is kind of woven into this web, and that's what secures the whole thing.
Exactly. It's like a tangled web, which is, I guess, where the name comes from. And, their documentation really emphasizes this. It says the tangle is both the transaction settlement layer, where transactions are confirmed, and the data integrity layer, which ensures everything is accurate and tamper-proof.
Okay, that's pretty clever, actually. So if there's no mining, how do they handle transaction fees?
Well, that's the really interesting part. Because there are no miners to pay, they can, theoretically, offer feeless transactions.
Feeless, like completely free.
Yeah, that's the goal. And that's what's so potentially revolutionary about this, especially for those microtransactions everyone's talking about with the Internet of Things.
Right. All those tiny little devices constantly sending data back and forth.
Exactly. So imagine, like, I don't know, a smart city with thousands of sensors collecting data.
Okay, yeah, I can see where this is going.
If each of those sensors had to pay even a tiny fee for every data packet they sent.
It would just become unmanageable, right? Too expensive.
Exactly. But with feeless transactions, suddenly that kind of network becomes way more practical, way more affordable.
Okay, so that's a pretty compelling argument for IOTA. But I'm also seeing some skepticism in some of these articles.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a blockchain project without some controversy, right?
Right, of course. But specifically, some people are saying that the tangle isn't truly decentralized. Something about a central coordinator node.
Ah, yes. The coordinator. That was definitely a point of contention in IoT's early days.
So is it still a concern?
Well, it's important to understand the context. The coordinator was initially introduced as a kind of temporary safety net while the network was still young and growing.
So, like training wheels for a blockchain?
Kind of, yeah. It was meant to prevent certain types of attacks that could have destabilized the network early on, but the long-term goal has always been to remove it entirely.
So are they moving in that direction?
Absolutely. The recent migration to the Move VM, which we'll get into more later, is a big step towards that fully decentralized vision. So, yeah, while that concern about the coordinator was valid at one point, it's becoming less relevant as the tech matures.
Got it. That makes sense. And speaking of things that are becoming more relevant, IOTA is making some big claims about scalability, right?
Oh, yeah. They're really leaning into that.
So they say they can scale horizontally by adding what they call workers to validators' processing power. But to be honest, that sounds a bit technical for me. Can you break it down?
Sure. Think of it like this. In a lot of blockchains, when things get busy, when there are a lot of transactions happening, things can slow down and fees can go way up.
Like when Ethereum gets clogged up and suddenly you're paying $100 to send $10 worth of ETH.
Exactly. It's a nightmare. So what IOTA is trying to do is avoid that bottleneck by basically allowing more validators to participate in parallel as the network grows.
So it's like adding more lanes to a highway.
Exactly. Instead of trying to cram more cars into the same number of lanes, you just build more lanes. In this case, the lanes are those workers that are contributing more processing power to the network. And the more workers you have, the more transactions you can handle simultaneously.
And in theory, that should keep those fees down.
Precisely. The idea is that as the network grows, it can adapt to handle that increased demand without sacrificing speed or affordability.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here, but now there's this other piece of the puzzle. The Move VM. I keep seeing it everywhere in their docs.
Yeah, Move VM. That's their new baby,
Uh,
and they're pretty excited about it.
So what is it exactly? Why is it so important?
Basically, the Move VM is the virtual machine that runs the smart contracts on IOTA's platform. Think of it as the operating system for all those decentralized applications, the dApps that people are building on IOTA.
Okay, so it's kind of like the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really special about it is the programming language it uses, which is called Move.
Move. So what's so special about this Move language?
Well, it was designed with a really strong focus on security, especially when it comes to digital assets. You see, a lot of older smart contract languages have these vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit to, steal funds or manipulate the system.
Like those reentrancy attacks you always hear about.
Yeah, exactly. Or problems with poison tokens that can mess up the whole ecosystem. Move tries to prevent these kinds of exploits by having these built-in security features at the language level.
So it's like having a security system baked right into the code itself.
Yeah, precisely. And IoT is making a big deal about how this could dramatically reduce the number of hacks and exploits we see on other chains.
Which, I mean, that would be a huge win for everyone, right?
Right.
More security means more trust.
Absolutely. And it also makes it easier for developers to build secure applications without having to be, cryptography experts.
Right, because who wants to spend all their time worrying about vulnerabilities when they could be building cool new stuff?
Exactly. And speaking of cool new stuff, they're also pushing this idea of on-chain assets that go beyond just basic cryptocurrencies.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. So it's not just about owning tokens, it's about creating more complex things on the blockchain.
Exactly. They're talking about things like dynamic NFTs, which are way more interesting than just owning a static digital image or whatever.
So, like, what could a dynamic NFT do?
Well, imagine an in-game item in a video game.
Okay, like a sword or something.
Yeah. So instead of that sword just being a picture, it's actually an NFT that's represented on the Tangle. And as you use that sword in the game, as it gets more powerful, all those upgrades are reflected in the NFT itself.
Oh, wow. So the NFT is like a living record of the item's history.
Exactly. It's dynamic, it can change and evolve. And because it's on the Tangle, it's all secure and tamper-proof.
That's pretty cool. So you can imagine all sorts of applications for that, not just in gaming.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole new world of possibilities for digital ownership and how we interact with digital assets.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the tech, but how are they actually putting this into practice?
Well, they've got a bunch of real-world projects going on. One of the big ones they're highlighting is this thing called TWIN, which stands for Trade Worldwide Information Network.
Okay, TWIN. What's that all about?
It's basically a digital platform built on IOTA that's designed to make global supply chains more secure and transparent.
So, like tracking products as they move around the world.
Yeah. And sharing data between all the different parties involved, manufacturers, shippers, retailers, everyone. The idea is that by having this shared tamper-proof record on the Tangle, you can reduce fraud, increase efficiency, and make everyone more accountable.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in today's globalized world where supply chains are so complex.
Totally. And then they've got another project called Multi-NIP, which is taking a really interesting approach to using tokens.
Okay, multi-nip. This sounds different.
Yeah, it's not just about money. They're using tokens and digital wallets to incentivize specific behaviors, like things that benefit the community or promote sustainability.
So it's like rewarding people for doing good things.
Yeah, basically. It's a way to use blockchain technology to drive positive change.
Mhm.
They're also involved in this European blockchain PCP thing, which suggests they're getting some serious attention from government agencies and big institutions.
Interesting. So they're not just playing around in the fringes, they're engaging with the mainstream.
Exactly. And they're exploring a whole range of applications, like tokenized KYC for more secure and private identity verification, managing intellectual property rights with smart contracts, even creating digital product passports to track the entire life cycle of a product.
Digital product passports. That's a new one.
Yeah, it's all about promoting a circular economy where we reuse and recycle more. So you could track a product from its raw materials all the way to its end of life, ensuring it's disposed of responsibly.
Okay, that's pretty cool. It seems like they're really trying to push the boundaries of what blockchain can do.
Totally. They're not just focused on one narrow use case, they're really exploring the full potential of this technology.
Which brings us to the big news that really caught our eye, the alpha release of their IOTA identity framework.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Hmm.
This is where things start to get really interesting, especially in the context of everything else we've talked about.
So, what's the big idea behind IOTA identity?
They're basically trying to build a universal layer of trust for the internet.
A universal layer of trust. That sounds like a tall order.
It is. But the way they're approaching it is through this concept of self-sovereign identity, or SSI.
Okay, SSI. For those of us who aren't deep in the crypto weeds, what does that actually mean?
It means you, the individual, have complete control over your own digital identity. Just like you control your physical wallet, you control your digital identity, who has access to it, and how it's used.
Okay, so it's all about putting the power back in the hands of the user.
Exactly. And this is where verifiable credentials come in. Imagine your driver's license, your passport, your diploma, all those important documents, but in digital form.
And these verifiable credentials, they're stored on the Tangle.
Well, not exactly. They're kept off-chain for privacy reasons, but they're cryptographically linked to the Tangle, so you can verify their authenticity without revealing all your personal information.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like having a digital notary service that can vouch for the legitimacy of your credentials.
Precisely. And because they're using the MoveVM for this, you get all those security benefits we talked about earlier, making it much harder for someone to forge or tamper with your credentials.
That makes sense. So how would this work in practice? Like, how would I use IOTA identity in my daily life?
Well, imagine you need to prove your age to access a website. Instead of handing over your driver's license or some other sensitive document, you could just present a verifiable credential that proves you're over 18 without revealing your birth date or any other personal details.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of like a privacy-preserving way to verify information.
Exactly. And it could be used for all sorts of things, from logging into websites to conducting financial transactions, even proving your qualifications for a job.
And because it's all based on open standards like those W3C, DIDs, and VCs you mentioned, it should work across different platforms and systems, right?
That's the idea. The goal is to create this interoperable ecosystem where your digital identity can seamlessly move with you across the internet.
Okay, so that's the vision. But is anyone actually using IOTA identity yet?
Well, it's still early days, remember, it's an alpha. But we are seeing some early adoption, which is encouraging. The Biometric Update article mentioned that Walt.ed, a pretty big player in the digital identity space, is partnering with IOTA.
Oh, wow. So they're getting some serious industry buy-in.
Yeah, and Walt.ed specifically highlighted IOTA's work with the European Commission, their strong community, and, of course, those feeless transactions.
It seems like those feeless transactions are a recurring theme here.
They are. It's a big part of their appeal. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, especially for applications like identity where you might be making a lot of small, frequent transactions.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture. Why should someone care about IoT? Like, why should they choose to build on this platform?
Well, IoT is making a pretty compelling case for itself. They're emphasizing real-world adoption. They've got those reimagined smart contracts with the Move language. They're promising high performance with both their Layer 1 and their upcoming EVM-compatible Layer 2. And they're really pushing the boundaries of digital identity with IOTA identity.
Plus those feeless transactions, of course.
Of course. And they're also talking about their easy-to-use web wallet extension, their parallel transaction processing for fast and scalable transactions, and the overall versatility of their ledger technology.
Okay, so they're hitting all the major buzzwords.
They are, but the real question is, can they deliver?
Right, exactly. So what should our listeners be thinking about as they consider IoT? Like, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest thing to consider is their unique approach to blockchain technology with a tangle. That whole idea of achieving scalability and feeless transactions, it's a game changer if they can pull it off. And then, their focus on the Move language and IoTA identity shows they're serious about security, giving users control over their digital lives.
It's a pretty compelling vision of a more decentralized and user-centric internet, that's for sure.
It is, but it's also important to be realistic. There are still some uncertainties here.
Right, like those questions about their past decentralization issues.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even though they're moving in the right direction, we need to see how their architecture holds up as adoption grows. Can they really handle all those transactions without sacrificing performance or security?
That's a big question mark.
It is. And then there's the question of developer adoption. Will developers embrace the Move language and build on IOTA? That's what will ultimately determine whether they can build a thriving ecosystem.
So lots of potential, but also some big hurdles to overcome.
Exactly. It's definitely a project to watch.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive into IOTA, what's the one big question our listeners should be pondering?
I think the most interesting question is this. What impact will the Move VM migration and this focus on security have on the overall blockchain landscape? Will it force other platforms to rethink their own approaches to security? And if IoT can truly deliver on its promises of scalability and feeless transactions, could it disrupt the entire industry?
Those are some great questions to chew on. IoT is definitely pushing the envelope, and it'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. It's a story that's still being written.
For sure. And for those of you who want to keep digging, we highly recommend checking out IoT's own documentation on their website. They've got tons of info there.
And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can even dive into the Move programming language itself.
Yeah, why not? And don't forget to check out some of those real-world use cases we mentioned, like TWIN. Seeing how this technology is being applied in the real world is always the best way to understand its true potential.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, well, that's it for our deep dive into IoT. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.